Alright, so this is the pre-game recording for Yet Again Unto the Breach, where I am playing Nazca. Once again, I don't know if I'm going to be releasing these videos, but I'm basically creating them before we start the game in order to make sure that when I make mistakes in my thinking or decision making, I can come back with hindsight and correct them. So, quick background on the game, and then what we're going to do in this video. The game is a 20-player Dominions 5 run, hosted by the ever excellent General Confusion, and the players are made up by a bunch of his subscribers. A number of them are quite impressive veterans who scare me to death. I obviously have, I think, one completed game, which was the last subscriber game, and a couple of blitzes under my belt, so I'm not exactly the most professional Dominions player ever, which is one of the reasons why I'm using this recording process as a training tool. So what I'm going to do in this video is basically set out the same things we did in the pre-game video for the Atlantis game. I'm going to walk through my decision-making process, which is looking at the nation I have, looking at what the nations that are around us have, looking at the map, and then defining two things: a force creation strategy, which matches the challenges and the strategic objectives that we're going to need to achieve, and then defining the strategic plan itself, taking into consideration the forces we believe we're going to be able to generate. Now, I might not be able to do that last bit in this video because of time limitations, but at the very least, we're going to get a true noob's walkthrough of what is, by reputation, one of the most powerful nations in the game, which is middle-aged Nazca. But I am a complete noob, so this may be the worst national summary ever. But still, it is ever useful to look at what resources the nation you're having has. So you can then learn it by playing, come back, and laugh at yourself later. So if you're here for a little bit of entertainment and a noob's thoughts, you're in the right place. If you're looking at this to learn a nation, yeah, go watch something better. Okay, let's look first and foremost at middle-aged Nazca. And I won't spend too long dwelling on... That was the thrones, not pretenders. I won't spend too long dwelling on the parts of Nazca that everyone has talked about before. I'll go over those quickly, and then I'll go over what I think are the tweaks to the nation as I see them from sort of a first principles review, and how I think Nazca can be played better. I understand the arrogance of a noob saying Nazca can be played better than people who have, driven it to one of the most victorious nations in Dominions 5. I understand that. But still, you have to trust your gut on some of these things. So what does Nazca have that everyone talks about? Noting that this is not all of the units here, and we'll talk about some very important summons afterwards. Basic characteristics of Nazca: everything except for your human troops fly. You have these recruit highlands and mountain troops. I'll go over them later. But in terms of a commander lineup, you have a flying scout, you have a human commander, you have a cheap 60 leadership commander, who is, I think, one of the great strengths of the Nazca nation. We'll come back to that. You have a much more practical 70 gold, 80 leadership dude, which means you can get formations and +1 morale, which is very important, again, for reasons I'll come back to later. We'll come back to the mummies after we do the living guys. You have the Akala. The Akala is a 100 gold 2-path mage. Its paths are not particularly useful. It exists to be a research lab monkey. At 100 gold sacred for 9 research points, it is okay for that role, but a little bit worse considering that as Nazca you're almost always going to take drain scales, which means you are going to get terrible payoff using these guys. But nonetheless, they are very important, and early on they can be used because they are priest level 1s to lead small sacred expansion parties, which I intend to do to jump forward to my strategy. You have Huron Priests. Huron Priests are excellent. They are 235 gold. They are Death 2 mages. They are Earth 1, and they have a random from Air, Earth, and Astral. Everything on that list is useful. Air cross paths means eventually you're looking at Wind of Death. You're looking at Wailing Winds. Earth cross paths means you can get E2s, which can summon Earth Power to E3, and that opens up a whole bunch of options for you in terms of Strength of Giants, Legions of Steel, all that good stuff. Astral means that you can wire them into communions. They are obviously extremely expensive as communion slaves, but it still gives you access to big battlefield magic later on. Incredibly enough, as Nazca in Drain Scales, I am probably going to use these guys to research for the simple reason that they are faster researchers Then Akala's in Drain 3, despite the fact it is 235 gold for 10 research points. Find me a nation which has a worse research deal. There are some of them, but it's pretty bad. Like most Nazcans, cold-resistant flying. These guys are old, which is a serious limitation, especially since Ermor is in this game, and if they throw up Burden of Time, these guys are all going to get diseases and die, but that is not as important as you'd think, for reasons that we'll come back to when we talk about the mummies. Inca and Koya. Okay, these are the cap-only, slow-to-recruit mages. They are both excellent. You will always wish you had a million more of them, and in all of my tests, I wish I had a million more of them, especially since they're not that much more expensive than the Huron Priest for what you get. So the Inca. If you could recruit Inca everywhere, Nazca would be absolutely... well, it's already probably broken. It would be more broken than it currently is reputed to be. Spoiler alert, in my expansion test so far, I don't like Nazca that well, but I think that's because their power curve is more the year 1 to year 3 sort of band, and then you peter off. Inca are Fire 2, Air 2, Holy 3, which means those big sacred blobs that you can put together as Nazca can be Divine Blessed. That is very important. Randoms. You will almost never hit the random, but still, Fire, Air, Astral, all of those are useful if you happen to hit one. Don't use them to research. They are Awe, they are Shock Resistant, they are Cold Resistant, they are Storm Immune. These guys would make, if it wasn't for the really low hit points, serviceable thugs with some gear, in my view. I'm not sure if that holds. However, because they are Rec Point 4 cap only, and because when they die they kill a Koya if one is available and you will want some Koya out, I wouldn't risk them thugging. I don't intend to risk them thugging. I may change that game plan as the game goes on. But there it is. But ultimately, Inca exist to lead large blobs and bless large blobs of sacreds, or at least that's what I think they exist to do. Koya, meanwhile, are incredible mages, and they're there to do mage things. They are Earth Astral Crosspath, which is great for forging. They're Death 2. They have randoms, and they will sometimes hit a random at 30% chance across a wide range of paths, but mostly they forge crystal items, they go into communions boosted by astral Hurons, and they throw big death, big earth, big astral. But mostly I value them for forging, for searching, for being amazing mages, and generally versatile. They're good researchers, but you'll never use a 4 rec point cap only mage as a researcher. It's just a waste. Then you have indie human mages, which I'll talk about quickly because they're easy to forget. You have they're all heretics, by the way, but that's okay because Nazca's going to have terrible dominion. You don't really want it anyway. They're disease healer 1. You might get some use out of it. It's handy to have if someone really valuable gets diseased, but really they're here because they give you nature access. This is a mountain recruit or capital recruit mage, which is basically the same as finding indie nature mages. You have earth nature on the female, and the guy has air nature. Depending on how you're doing site searching, you'll preference one or the other. Bringer of Fortune 1 is nice, but not particularly strong, so I wouldn't recruit a bunch of them for that effect, even though you're probably going to have Misfortune Dominion. I'd mostly use them to search nature, and later on slap a whole bunch of items on them so you can get some nature access. It's shitty nature access, but it's nature access, and that's valuable on a nation like this. That's your living mages. For every unit from here to here, not including the mummies themselves, they mummify in the event that they die. So the Apu and the Apu Squipe, or however you pronounce that, become ordinary Malkis on death. Akalas become Malki priestesses. Huron priests become Malki priests. Incas and Koyas, if one of them dies, it kills another one if it can. If not, it just creates a Royal Malki with only its paths. If it kills both, you get a Royal Malki with the paths of all of the mages involved. Each of these Malki are useful for things, but I think the stars of the show are this one and this one, for reasons we'll go into now, I guess. This Malki is seemingly terrible. It is 140 gold, it is sacred, it has a 6 damage fist attack, it has 12 hit points, has jack all leadership except for undead leadership, but it's expensive for that, and you can just use Hurons for that job. So you're thinking, why on earth would I ever recruit this thing? The answer is you would not. You would recruit Apus. And Apus for 40 gold and 1 recruitment point, when they die, become 140 gold. Malkies. And this... Alright, so my recording definitely cut there. Let's come back to the mages. Okay, so these guys can capture slaves. Capture slaves are important. When I did a sort of a first principles review of a lot of Dominions nations and watching play, one of the characteristics I personally identified of nations which tend to be regarded as powerful or more powerful than they will otherwise be is the ability to generate troops or mages or combat power or generate forces in a way that is not directly linear with the amount of territory you control. So being able to make troops through free spawn, through summoning, some mechanism that allows you to bypass the pay 10 gold at a fort up to your rec and resource point limit and get dudes. Capture slaves is one of those mechanisms. Using a palisade to produce Apus allows you to produce Malkies, and Malkies for a yearly upkeep of 56 gold, so around 5 gold a turn, a little bit less than that. Lets you capture, I think the number is D6 plus 4 slaves per turn, which is really cheap. Now there is a tiny pop kill that goes along with that, but the pop kill is nowhere near on the same level as something like ghoul summoning. So, put that into perspective. By producing, say, 2 Apu a turn for 80 gold, you can then kill them, get 2 Malkies, and at that point you're getting 8 plus 2d6 slaves per turn for the rest of the game. What are those slaves to jump forward to the troops? No, they're not that guy. They are Hatun Runa. Hatun Runa, where are you? Oh, here we are. He's so shit, he's at the far left, even worse than the human troops. We'll talk about Hatun Runa later, and I'll expand on why I think the Apu into Malki strategy is actually an under-regarded aspect of Nazca's power that I'm keen to test. But these are the guys that you're going to be summoning d6 plus 4 of per Malki per turn. So I think Malkies are really good. I just would never recruit them because you can essentially make a fort produce 200 free gold for you if you instead just produce 2 Apus and suicide them. Malki Priestesses. This is basically just an Akala, so you get the same thing, but you switch over to having this mummy chassis. That's terrible because you lose the ability to fly, and your upkeep goes from 40 gold a year to 70 gold a year. So Nazca is a necrocracy. They believe that old people need to be paid more money than living. As important people die, they are mummified, and they get permanent state benefits. You can see the problem with this is that eventually the dead will outnumber the living, and the welfare system won't be able to cope. But we're not there yet in game. This is Nazca's golden age. They've only been mummifying their dead for a couple of generations, so it's not a problem. However, it can become a problem during your game. It certainly became a problem during some of my test games. If you get too many mummies and you don't expand fast enough and you can't pay their stipends, you will go bankrupt. You'll only get Malki Priestesses if your Akalas die, and this is a nice little second chance mechanism on all of your living mages. If you lose them in combat, at least you get this priestess, or this priest, or the royal Malki back where they created, and they can do something. Malki Priestesses can continue to research, and they can also reanimate undead, but they're reanimating undead like only somewhat better than, say, a Scalarian Cultist, and a Scalarian Cultist is much cheaper than the 175 gold, or admittedly 100 gold that you pay for an Akala, and doesn't require a temple, and doesn't require 2 command points, and is generally bad. So I wouldn't deliberately get these guys to reanimate undead. I would use slaves instead. Huron priests become Malki priests. Again, you're getting the mummy chassis instead. You're losing the ability to fly, which means you can't keep up with your armies anymore. If you do go into combat, it's not that bad because all these mummies have innate spellcaster, which means you can cast spells even when you're engaged in combat. And you also get 2 spells per turn. Now, you're not scripting both of those spells, but you're putting out a lot of magical firepower. And while that's not important with something which only has F1A1, something with D2, that means you're throwing Horde of Skeletons and maybe double Horde of Skeletons, maybe other useful spells. It's not bad. So if these are in forts when they're assaulted, these can be useful defenders. Do not pay 350 gold for them. they're two recruitment they're two recruitment points. So you could always, if you really desperately wanted one for reasons that escape me, get a Huron Priest for 235 and go send it off to do something useful till it dies. Royal Marquis. Royal Marquis are incredible. They only cost 2 recruitment points, so you can get them faster than an Inca and a Koya. Despite the fact that an Inca and a Koya combined, which is what has to happen to make this thing have full paths, is an 8 recruitment point double mage. I don't get it. Anyway, they're 850 gold. That's the barrier to you recruiting them directly. Nonetheless, you're probably going to attempt to recruit them directly. Let's have a look at this beast, because it has, I think, 3 really important services that it can do for Nazca, with a 4th minor one. The first one is these things summon your sacred undead ghosts. They summon 2 per turn, the Supaya. A Supaya is a high attack, high defense, ethereal, storm-flying bullshit unit, which is incredible. And you get 2 per turn for Royal Monkey. That means that Supaya essentially have a relatively high gold summon cost, because you're paying something like 30 gold a year, 30 gold a turn rather, just to keep this in action. So the Supaya are like 15 gold, but I would totally pay that for a Supaya. You can get a hat at Construction 4, which you can put on them, and that makes them summon 3 per turn. Most of your Royal Monkeys, as Nazca, at least by mid-game, are probably going to be Supaya summoners. In my test games, I have not been able to afford them. I don't think it's quite worth it. You have other ways to get Sacreds, but once you do have money, or if I ever have money, I would totally get Royal Monkeys as summoners. They are also excellent battle mages, because this is an F2, A2, E2, S2, D2, with a random that it will probably never hit, because this is a derivative of the chance of the Inca's random. I don't know why it doesn't get the same chance as the Koya, but hey. And Holy 3. The physical chassis is nothing particularly great, but it has high MR and very high morale, which gives it potential late game potential, I suppose, for certain tasks once it has the magic to make itself survivable. But if you think about what this path allows you to do, especially if you then go Power of the Spheres and upgrade all of this stuff, it'll throw out 2 spells a turn from all these paths, and there's some pretty good spells that are available at those cross paths. You need to get to that point, and you need to research those spells. Those are both problems for Nazca, because your research is garbage, as we'll talk about after we talk about what we have. We'll talk about what we don't have. So point 2 is they're really impressive battle mages, but they're way too expensive and they're way too slow for you to use them as that. Anything in the early game, I'm mostly dreaming about the late game potential. The final use is that in 1 turn, you can recruit a unit which allows you to site search all of this. And this gives you gems. It is a very expensive site searcher, but you will struggle to find a more efficient site searcher in the game, at least efficient in terms of recruitment time to site searching potential. And for that reason, I will probably, even if it means sacrificing a fort, I will make one to search my land for sites, just to find gems. Now, because a lot of them will be on summoning duty, it's important to note their Fortune Teller 15, which is actually a good Fortune Teller value. That means that having a bunch of them sit here in Nazca, in the Misfortune 3, will hopefully protect your capital from the worst of the effects that you will face. That makes them really handy. Alright, that's what we have in terms of mages. Key characteristics: we have Holy 3s, we have Flying Death 2s, we have a decent flying commander, we have some nature access, and we have the ability to free spawn shit. And free spawning stuff is important. Let's talk about units. Let's talk about the units that people talk about, people sometimes talk about, and then we'll talk about the units that people don't really talk about that I think they should. Okay, stars of the show. Cap only Sacreds, you have 2. Everyone talks about Condor Warriors. Why? Condor Warriors are map move 18 and Storm Flyers. This map move 18 is critical. Map move 18 means you can reliably jump over 2 provinces within friendly territory to get to where you're going. That is a significant increase in mobility over map move 16, which means you can only jump over 1 friendly territory. They have 9 protection. They have a lance, which means they do extra damage on the charge, reasonable stats. Look, with a good bless, these guys will expand relatively well. You might lose a few depending on what your bless is, but they're good. People use a lot of them. I like Sun Guards better. Why? Because I don't care about map move 16 because I love Hatun Runa. What do you get for the 3 extra gold and a few extra resources? And agreeing to go... Sorry, video cut out there again. I think I was in the middle of my love affair with Sun Guards. Yes, okay. Love affair with Sun Guards. I like them. Because for 3 extra gold and a bunch of... Not a bunch of, a few extra resources, and the loss of Storm Flying, you go up to Protection 12, so you gain a couple of protection points. It's not great, but it's handy. And you get this high damage magic attack Sun Mace. So that's magic damage, which is an early game answer to Ethereal if you come up against it. And it's also, if you look at it, ×3 versus Undead Demons. So these guys have a built-in Holy Scourge on their troops. This is good if you border Urmor, like I do, and you need a way to kill Survival Blessed Lictors. These guys will just smack them. They'll smack them real bad, because the weapon does triple damage. And even if that only acts on the... I don't know if that acts on the strength and the damage combined, or just the damage, and then you add strength as normal, but even then, that's 21 blunt damage plus their strength, which will be buffed anyway. Like, these things just king hit. If it's undead or a demon, they destroy it. And I think that's valuable. I think that is an asset that Nazca needs to be aware of having, and should use. So these are your sacreds. You then have recruitable flying troops. This is the 10 gold flying troop brigade. This is the human troop brigade. Human troop brigade comes in different brands of terrible. 7 gold for a dude with 6 protection and a spear. Crap. 8 gold for a dude with a spear and... What was the difference again? Cloth armor. Oh yeah, this guy has a shield. Yeah, you want to pay for a hide shield? No, you don't. He's crap. Human warrior. This guy has a sling. Slings are terrible. He's crap. If you had to recruit anyone, maybe you pay 7 resources to get a javelin, which is useful in this 16 damage mace attack and some protection. Like, there are nations for whom this chaff would not be terrible, but you have much better chaff, so why would you ever recruit it? Of the flying troops, people talk about 2 units, and I see why. The first is the Okakuruna Spearman. Why? Because it's a flying lancer with piercing damage that does good damage on the charge. Crap all protection, but you can shit out a lot of them at 10 gold, 7 resources, 9 recruitment points, or at least you could if your scales weren't complete trash. This unit compares relatively well to Kalem's units, which Kalem uses to expand, except for the fact that Kalem will usually be a scales build. Nonetheless, you can use these guys because they are mobile, they are handy, they do damage, they go through armor, they die like flies, but they do the job. If you hate life, you can instead pick one with a mace, in which case that's just a Hatun Runa with better stats, don't do it. Or a hatchet, if you want slashing damage and 1 damage less than the dude with the mace. I don't think you do. I don't see a reason why you would. I wouldn't recruit this guy. I would recruit the Lancer because Nazca is all about the Alpha Strike and killing quickly. Because if you hit back, you'll die because you have 2 troops per square, terrible attack density, and crappy protection. You will die. So buy Lancers, kill people quickly. Archers are handy. It is a short bow. The short bow is crap in the Middle Age by itself against most threats, but Nazca has easy access to the flaming arrows, which is good, and also archers stay still. So you could hypothetically build large archer stacks. I might try it, I might not, it depends on what I'm facing, but you're paying ultimately 10 gold for a 9 damage short bow in the Middle Age. This is the age in which Ulm is rocking around with high protection, 15 damage, armor piercing arbalists that just absolutely kill everything, and then the dudes have armor and short swords. Like, this guy does not belong in this era, but because you have access to the right magic, you can wind guide him, you can flaming arrows him, I can see how he might be useful. These are all really good. You will use these units to expand, you will use this guy to expand, and afterwards I think this guy is a hero. No one talks about them. Well, people talk about them. I don't want to sound Trumpian, but people talk about them, but I don't think they're given enough attention because they have some serious deficiencies. This is the Hatun Runa. So the way Nazcan society works is inevitably the living go into debt to the mummies because the mummies own everything. And one of the only ways that you can get out of debt is you can agree to be a conscript slave. Being a slave in Dominions is actually excellent because all being a slave means is I have terrible morale, but I cost half upkeep and are generally very cheap. If this unit was just recruitable, I would still see a case for it, because it's 5 gold, 3 resources, 2 recruitment points. So recruit as many as you want for a unit that still does 16 damage. Now, admittedly, at 8 attack and 11 defense skill, but they still have 11 hit points and 6 protection. These guys are not absolutely terrible if you look at this basic stat line. They are worth 5 gold, especially since, because they are flyers, they are worth 2 humans in siege attack and 1 in siege defense. You can stuff forts with these guys for basically no gold, and those forts will not fall. You can really crack forts quickly and delay fort cracking by using these guys. And they cost 2 gold per year. They cost less than 2/10 of a gold per turn to upkeep. They are bloody cheap. And they get even cheaper when you realize that you can capture them for basically free. You can capture them for the equivalent of somewhere between 1 and 2 gold per. It may be even cheaper than that when you think about it. So a Malki is costing you 5 gold. So for 5 gold, you're getting between 5 and 11 per turn. So yeah, 1 gold or less, plus some slight upkeep from the minor pop kill. You can produce absolute crap loads of Hatun Runa. You can stuff your forts, you can patrol every province, you can chaff it up. Not quite as much as Scaleria or Ermor, but you can certainly produce a bunch of meat for your army, and that allows you to bypass spending gold, which you don't have much of, recruiting units. I like Hatun Runa for that reason. And I use a shitload of them. Problem, morale 7. That means in enemy dominion they are morale 6. These guys run almost on contact. You need to lift the morale up if you're going to use them in combat. You don't need to lift the morale if you're going to use them as siege chaff. But if you're going to use them to fight, and I think you use them to fight. I think you use them to block Evo, to catch Evos. I think you use them to go in with your Sacreds to dilute the squares around your targets, ensure us around, and make sure your Sacreds don't suffer all the casualties. I think you use them for that, but you need to lift the morale in order to do that. So they should never not be led, at the very least, by your more expensive commander, who will give them +1 morale off the bat. At least keep them a 7 in enemy territory. You then want to keep them alive for a while without going into combat, so they get experience stars. And then, as Nazca, I would seriously consider using your Nature's guys to put Horns of Valor on these guys. Or, if Inca are leading them as well, you can easily get +2, +3 morale boosts, get some experience stars on them, and make them work. I've tested it. It can happen. It's incredibly annoying. You will lose large groups of them to routes if you're not careful, and you need to control the mix to make sure that they don't HP route you by running away because they're shitty morale. But at the end of the day, just like Middle Age Phlegra is a stronger nation in some respects than Late Age Phlegra, because they can use tyrants to summon hordes of low morale chaff, Nazca has the ability to summon hordes of low morale flying chaff using a non-cap only cheap recruit. I think it is an excellent ability. So that's Nazca and what you have. There's one extra piece of the puzzle. Actually, no, there's 3 extra pieces of the puzzle when you talk about, which are the summonable units. There's 3 of note. One is the Sapphire, which is an ethereal sacred ghost. They're cool. They're storm flyers. That's handy about them. You have the Huaca, who is 15 astral gems at con 5 for 7 if you're wearing the Huaca headdress. Which I'd recommend you do if you're summoning them. They're a bit expensive, but they are basically... they're relatives of the Inca in that they're the expelled sort of precursors to the Eagle Kings, which means they're essentially a unit with a magic weapon and fire resistance that has ore, which really increases their survivability in melee against people who care about ore. I'm not sure they're worth the pearls. You'll usually have other things to do with the pearls, and you probably won't have too many pearls as Nazca because you only get 1 from your cap site. So you'll really be dependent on site searching. But I suppose they could have niche uses. The most important one is the Condor. I don't feel a need to go over the Condor again. It's a size 3, double attack, no protection beast that exists and is important for 2 reasons. One, because you can give it a truly massive bless, and because it has 2 attacks, it has decent attack density. And secondly, because you can crap out a ton of them. Why? Because the Summon Condor spell everyone knows about this by now, but I'll go over it anyway, sorry we're in debug mode, is a Conjure 3 spell, which is 10 plus 2 for every extra level the caster has. So if you're taking a Thunder Weapon Bless, you get 20 Condors for 9 air gems per Pretender turn. That's an excellent deal. 20 Condors for 9 gems, less than half a gem each. That's excellent if you can get air gems. You get air gems by searching really quickly, you get air gems by trading, but really this means that you can crap out a ton of sacreds relatively early in the game when you're probably struggling with expansion, and later game, once you find some sites, you can keep up Condor production and they give you a high mobility sacred, which is good for a lot of things. We'll see all these units once I get into the game, hopefully, well, as long as I last at least long enough to summon some Condors. So that's what we have. Let's talk about what we don't have as Nazca. Because you have all of those sacreds, you're almost certainly going to have a Hellbless. Because you want Condors, you're going to have an Awake God. That Awake God, this is not my actual god from the game, this is a dummy god with a different build that I was trying. It's not what I took, don't worry. It'll have Air 7, it'll have Thunder Weapons and be summoning Condors. That's excellent. So you have great sacred combat power, and you have the ability to generate sacreds for gems. What you don't have as Nazca, and all of these are things that you really need, are 1, you don't have money because you have Hell Scales, which means that, especially combined with the fact that you're rocking 235 gold primary battle mages and you're sitting with 850 gold royal mages, you're going to be broke a lot of the time. So you need to think of a way to bypass that. The second thing is you're going to have terrible research, because your primary research monkey is going to be putting out 6 research points a turn for 100 gold, and you can only recruit 1 per lab, temple, fort per turn. Once the fort has been upgraded. That's not great. And at the end of the day, in Dominions, no matter how powerful your troop lineup is, or your sacred lineup in this case is, at the end of the day, if you can't get research done, you will lose, because magic is extremely powerful and decides late game battles almost at a whim. A single well-built super combatant or a couple of battle mages will actually wreck the face of any combination of troops in the late game. So that's a problem. You have terrible research. Terrible money, terrible research, and not great expansion. You can do it with Akakruna Spearmen, and that's what you probably have to do. It's what I did and have done during all of my expansion tests. Okakruna Spearmen and small groups of Condor Warriors led by Akalas. But your expansion for the first couple of turns is actually pretty lethargic and also high attrition, which is not great. That's something to complain about. The final point to complain about, obviously, is that you have terrible diplomacy, because Nazca is regarded as extremely powerful and therefore is likely to be attacked. So how do we offset these problems? So money is a function of scales and land. If you can't improve the scales, you have to take more land, which means Nazca has to be, in my view, a rush nation. You have to kill people quickly, you have to take a lot of land, and you cannot afford to be bullied on land allocation. Otherwise, you'll be starved for income and you'll die on the vine. So Nazca can solve its money problems through the relatively simple expedient of just taking other people's stuff to compensate for the fact that its stuff is worth something like 30% less than someone with neutral scales stuff, and like half or worse that of someone who's got a full scales build. Nazca needs to get big in order to solve its gold problem, and thus be able to afford researchers, which leads into how do you solve your second problem. So research is a function of obviously how efficient your researchers are, which is a function of scales in the nation, how many of them you have, which is a function of forts and money, or how many gems you have if you can create research boosters. So Nazca needs to get those things in order to offset its research disadvantage. That means you need land to get gold to pay your researchers. You need to get land to get forts so you can make more researchers and not be capped by recruitment speed in order to get more of them, and basically brute force this problem with more Akalas. And you need to get more gems in order to make research boosters. At Con 4, you can make the Skull Mentor. At Con 6, you can make the Lightless Lantern. At Con 2, I don't know why I did it in that order, but at Con 2, you can native forge our quills. You probably won't want to forge our quills because you won't have enough air gems to recruit condors, and you need condors to kill everybody to get the gems. How do you get gems? You get gems by getting land and searching it, which basically means we're going to recruit 1 or 2 Royal Mulki, and we come back to the inevitable conclusion, which is we are Nazca, therefore we need to kill people. We need to kill people because we need money, because we need gems, because we need to offset our glaring national weaknesses, and we need to apply our national strength, which is our hordes and hordes of sacreds, in order to offset our weaknesses and come into a force generation strategy. And that force generation strategy will essentially be get big enough that we can run the summoning train of condors, that we can maybe get some suppliers later on, that we can produce a bunch of forts, in them having Mulkis, and those Mulkis can then mass up slaves. That is the force generation theory. The important part of that being getting the mages to get the research so that Nazca can use its relatively good pathing to throw big spells in the late game. If you get to the late game, you should, because you're Nazca. Why might that not be the case? And this is where I talk about the diplomatic analysis of the game. Ignore the thrones in this one, because this is not the actual generation of the game itself. This is just the map with randomly placed thrones. But I can point out where the nations are, and it does essentially guide your decision making. To my south, down about here, I have Middle-Aged Machaka. Bearing in mind, this is a 20-player game, so this might take a little bit of time to race through. Middle-Aged Machaka is weak early game. Middle-Aged Machaka is a great, on-paper, rush target. However, fighting Middle-Aged Machaka is a bit of a mugs game for 2 reasons. One, because it is the host of the game, and secondly, because they have assassins. Because it is the host of the game, and because it is Middle-Aged Machaka, you can bet that any offensive against them early in the game will generate considerable ire and potential coalitions, and I need to avoid coalitions in this game. Remember, I'm playing, like I said in the Atlantis game, not necessarily to win, but because these are good people. This is a community that's, centered around GC. We're not here to lie, cheat, and steal. We're here to play the best game we can while we learn with these people. And that means realizing that he probably has greater ability than most to rally a coalition against me. The other reason you don't want to kill Machaka is because over here is Scaleria. And Scaleria is one of those nations you just want dead. And anyone who borders Scaleria, I'm going to be nervous about killing, because I would much rather they go kill Scaleria. Because if you leave them alone, they will generate Infinity Skeletons. They'll generate Infinity Skeletons, they'll back them with good Communion Death Mages, they'll throw big battle magic, and life will suck for everybody. If Nazca is one of the stronger nations in the Middle Age, Scaleria is either right up there, or I would say probably ahead. Scaleria is probably the more powerful nation, to my noob judgment. So I don't want to kill Machaka if I can avoid. If I can get a good territory deal with Machaka, I do not want to fight them, because I can avoid a coalition that would be sparked by them, and because they're more likely to go and fight Scaleria, and that would be very good for everybody. The other reasons I don't want to fight Machaka is because this is, if you look at the terrain here, this is a relatively narrow front. This is relatively defensible. If you were to expand into Machaka, you would probably broaden your front quite extensively, and that's not great when you consider the threats that sit on all of these borders. So up here we have Ashdod. Ashdod is a giant nation. They are another superpower of the Middle Age. They're part of what I think a couple of the people in the community have been calling the Cancer Triangle. I'm not sure if it's a Cancer Triangle or a Cancer Box, but basically it runs me, Ashdod, Asphodel, who's a pop kill plant nation around here, Ermor, which is the more powerful pop kill nation around here. So this box consists of ludicrously strong, dangerous countries. Ashdod is particularly dangerous to me because he knows he borders me. So I am really expecting that there will be an anti-bird bless there. and an anti-bird bless on Ashdod is an extremely doable thing and makes me very vulnerable. So you can bet that I will be trying to establish peace here, even if that means having some sort of tacit agreement with the pop kills that I won't intervene against them until such time as they fought Ashdod. That's the sort of extent I'm going to have to go to avoid being murdered by Ashdod. Now, in all likelihood, they will still murder the pop kills themselves and become big and scary, but by that point, hopefully I will have battle magic and friends to help me offset the horde of, Mega Bless giants that can just cut through everything I can throw at them. Like, Anakites with the Rice Bless will kill an infinite number of Hatun Runa, and they'll kill a near infinite number of my Bless Sacreds, particularly if they have, as I suspect, a Shock Resist Bless, which negates my Thunder weapons. That's terrible. So I need peace here. To have peace here, I need to not present a target, and to not present a target, I need to not be in a war over here with my troops pulled down by someone who will then coalition me and collapse on me. That needs to be avoided. Ulm is over here, I think around here. Ulm is played by a guy who I had some dealings with the previous game, Mr. Root. Mr. Root is an interesting person. He's an opportunist. He will make deals with you if it makes sense to make deals with you, and he will attack you if you're weak. And because of that, again, I cannot promote weakness by getting involved in early wars. And especially if I got in a war with both of these, Ulm would jump me. Now, Nazca's got a good matchup with Ulm, but Nazca will have a good matchup with Ulm throughout the entire game, well into the future. And because that is so, not keen for an early war, but I'll consider it depending on how diplomacy goes down here. What I really need to do is secure good good income boundaries on these forts around here, these farmlands around here. Set up some sort of agreement with Uruk, who is here, and Pythium. And depending on how that goes, attack probably either one of them, whichever one gets into another war first. Sorry, video cut again. So yeah, I think the first war is going to have to be in this general direction. If we get a peace deal, obviously we will honour it. Same rules as last game in that sense. I'm not going to breach any agreements I sign. I'm going to negotiate in good faith, because ultimately it's a game and it's just not worth the skullduggery. It's not. There's a lot of that in Dominions, I think, watching videos, and I just don't want it to be part of my game. So we'll play a clean game, but we'll probably get involved in a war over here. One advantage of a war with Pythium would be it would then put me on the border with Ermor, which puts me in a strong position to then deal with them, which is something that will probably have to happen eventually, but as I said, we'll see. Anyway, I might actually not go on with the rest of my diplomatic thinking and instead talk through that as I do my first few turns, just because I know as far as a pre-game video goes, this is probably a pretty long one already. But in summary, this is Nazca. Nazca is a very strong nation by my read, which I do not enjoy playing so far. I do not enjoy them because you need to have trash scales, you need to have an awake pretender, and you don't expand particularly well, which makes you feel very sluggish through most of Year 0. I think Year 1 to Year 3 will be my golden age, and I really need to leverage whatever power I have at that point. That'll be the era where Blessed Condors, Blessed Caponi Sacreds can do a lot of really good work against pretty much anyone who doesn't have a built-in counter to it, like, for example, say, Ashdod. But over time, I'll be increasingly vulnerable to magical attacks. I'll be vulnerable to people who have much better research than me. So I have to focus on keeping up and getting as much leverage as I can through to the end, probably, of Year 2. And then by Year 3, be very aware of the fact that I'm on by that point, either a very even playing field or actually a disadvantage relative to a bunch of other people, for the simple reason that I don't expect to have anywhere near the same research output, even as Middle-Aged Machaka. Like, Middle-Aged Machaka has rapid researching sorcerers. They're expensive, but you can recruit them. He might have magic scales. If he does, they'll be even more insane. Pythium, if they're alive, will have good research. Vanheim not, but Vanarus over here will have good research. Orm will almost certainly have terrific research. I just don't worry about them as much because they don't have the pathing to do anything with it. So yeah, by the time we get to turn 36 onwards, I expect to be at something of a disadvantage. But to be honest, I'll just be, even though Nazca is powerful, I will just, again, be absolutely thrilled if I get to that point. Because I'll admit, first and foremost, that I'm surrounded by players up here and down here in particular who are just, I'll accept, more skilled than me. More skilled over here. The Uruk player is really good. So I don't know. And obviously the Ermol player is fantastic based on his performance in the previous game. So last game, Nosy were playing the Nordic Giants, basically held off a 4-person coalition, threw them back, and then by the end of the game was storming out. So yeah, I think he'll put up a good fight to the Bless Rush Giants. I just think the Bless Rush Giants will win. Anyway, that's that. I'll put the rest of my thinking in subsequent videos. And yeah, I will look back on this in 30, 40 turns and see just how wrong I was.